Okay, so today we're going to be doing more complicated cast shadows. To start, I will draw 2 prisms, and then we can add or calculate the shadows for both of them and discuss. So first, you can follow along and sketch these rectangular prisms with me. Generally speaking, we want to draw through the object so we can see those corners behind. We want to also not just have this as a normal prism or normal rectangle. We're going to extend these up a little bit, make it a bit more challenging. Okay, so we've got this cube with a little bit of a layer up there, and so that's going to be that side. This side, I guess we can do the same, like a similar sort of perspective, but what we want is a different sort of form. So here I'm going to draw a different form. Will these get in the way of each other? Hopefully not. We can change the lighting. See how it goes. Okay, so this one, it's a different sort of perspective. Okay, but we can see that it's going in the right direction. And we're also going to have a cutout. We're going to have a cutout that will look a little bit like this. Okay, so with one of these, we're gonna do this one, the top left. Actually, why don't we just add some line weight to each of them? So again, when you're adding line weight to some sketches, I recommend rotating the page. So you can get nice clean lines. Okay, these are gonna be our exterior lines. Okay. So that's that. We'll do the same thing on this side. Okay. And of course, this overlap here, we've got an overlap going on. Okay, so that's looking good. What we're gonna do now is let's focus in on this, this one at the back on the left. So when it comes to these shadow constructions, and this is why I left in these lines at the back, it's going to be important to know because we need to find out where the shadow is sort of starting from, where it might be changing. So here there's going to be some sort of change, and obviously where it terminates, where it stops. So it's easy to think of it with this first corner where we're going to cast a shadow out this way. And all of these generally are going to be going out in the same direction. Okay. And then what we're going to do is define how steep this is. Where will this shadow stop? So I want to make this rather steep. It's going to go something like this because we want to make sure that this doesn't interfere with that sketch over there. So if we were to think of this just as a square, then we would be drawing that line and we would have this shadow construction, nice and simple, right? Where all of this is dark. But what we haven't yet done is figured out where does this start? Where does this start to grow, and what shape does it have? Because it'll look similar. It'll look like it had this sort of peak. We need to have another peak going out over here. So the way that we do that is using the geometry there. We've extended this line down a little bit, and it's also going to follow the same sort of pattern, where we're going to need the intersection point there as well as there. So here we have completed sort of the top cast shadow, you know, if the light source is coming from this side. And then we can essentially, but this isn't the full story. We also need to cast this shadow, this edge down a little bit, and the sort of, you know, the shortcut here is really to just run a parallel line that runs parallel with this one over here, because we know that these guys are indeed going in the same direction. So the shadow here will also resemble something in the same direction. So it'll look something like that. Right now, it's hard to see it. So we're going to add a little bit of marker actually. So I've just got a couple markers, a medium marker, a dark marker, and a kind of colored one if we wanted to add some color. So I've got my darker marker here, and I will outline the dark cast shadow that we just constructed. Okay. Okay, so we've got that dark shadow, but we haven't figured out the cast shadow that happens on the object as well. We have the same thing going on. Think of it like we've got another cube here, and now this is its own plane, but it will be casting a shadow on itself as well. So we're going to follow the same route of, you know, striking a line that's, all of these are going parallel because of that light source. Same thing with it going down like that. Now we don't have to do anything else apart from finding out this point and essentially just making it go parallel in this case, because we know that all of these are going parallel, so we can use the same, you know, sort of shortcut to know how large the shadow should be, and this makes sense because we have essentially the same. We have the same light source for both, obviously, this part of the drawing as well as this one, and it's casting a similarly sized shadow. If you have two different ones in the same, and they look similar in size, then you're probably running into some problems. But in this case, it looks good because they are similar in size. So we've finished that second drop shadow, cast shadow rather. So here I'll use the thinner side, it's a smaller amount. Want to be accurate there. Then we can use the thicker side to come in and shade that in. Okay. So as you can imagine, this plane here is casting that shadow there. We've got this plane here casting that shadow there. The reason why we have this sort of triangular sort of shape there is because it's not just stopping there, but it's also catching some of the, there's still some shadow being cast from the top there. So that's why we've got, like, these two are sort of from the same object, just one part of it is casting onto itself, the other one's casting onto the ground. To make this a little bit easier to see, we can use a medium gray marker just to darken that darkest side. And this should be nice and easy for the eye to understand now. Which side is the darkest and what's casting that shadow. There you go. Okay, so that's one done, looking good. Now let's do this one. It's a little bit different. We're going to have some cast shadows onto itself, but the important part here is that we're going to have, yeah, there's like this corner. This corner is going to be a little bit more interesting. So maybe I'll just zoom into what's going on here so you can see a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to, again, establish the light source. It'll be going from the other direction this time. And here, we're going to have it so that it's going that way. So all of my lines will be going that way. Okay, and I will define, I don't want these to run into each other, and it doesn't really matter what you do here as long as you are consistent. I want to get this to focus. There we are, we're focused. Okay, so we've established the direction. This light source is going to be coming from that direction. Okay, light source. So we have, I always like to do the outside first. I don't know why. It just seems like it's easier to get right. So we've established the direction it's going in. Now we establish the angle of the light. Let's make it something like that. So again, similar projections, actually exactly the same projections to find these points. Okay. So let's just think about these the outside ones first. We can connect those points. They will be following the perspective, which is nice. And we've got a nice little cast shadow for the exterior of this, but we haven't yet figured out the interior. So this one, if we follow the same logic where if we have these 2 points, they're both going to be running parallel, right? They need to be casting these 2 shadows, these 2 edges down. So that's fine. We know it's going to go down like that. But what happens here? What happens when we've got this this entirely in shadow? This is the darker side of the object. How do we sort of resolve what's going on in this corner? Well, it's pretty simple. Wherever we have this this new surface here, which is entirely in light, we're gonna just draw a straight line up towards the corner. Okay, so now the shadow, it's not really being completed. You know, it's not going to be cast similarly like this. We're not seeing the corner and it, you know, cast down somewhere. What it does is it just basically comes right back up to this, and it'll look, might look a little bit funny now, but once we add in some of that darkest marker, you'll see this start to pop. So again, we're doing this, the outside first, seemingly nice, makes sense to me. So we're gonna outline the shape that we want our marker to fill in, and then we're going to add some of that marker. Looks good. And then we're going to do this side as well. So here we're going to get the same sort of shape that we started with, right? We're also going to do this side. Because now we have the cast shadow not only on the floor, but also on the top. Or on this side, rather. When it's getting a little smaller, you can use the other side of your marker. Works quite well. Okay. And then we can just add in some medium marker to help the eye understand this a bit better. There we go. Okay. So we zoom out, we see two different, more complicated shadow constructions, but still well within the means of, you know, it's possible how to define these shadows. They're still on the simpler side, I'd say. Not too many steps, but we don't need to be super complicated to kind of understand these core principles. And generally speaking, I always like to sort of take a step back to see, you know, does this sort of read well? You know, your eyes won't lie. They'll notice if something's kind of not right. So, you know, take a look at it from, you know, a couple steps back. It'll help see if you've done it correctly. And if something's a little bit wonky, you know, you'd have to take a look at some of the lines that you have there and what you're referencing. As you probably noticed when we were kind of constructing this, there are a lot of lines that can get a little bit overwhelming. But again, this is the theory so that you can understand it, and then you can simplify your sketches sort of going forward. So, okay, this is fine for some basic prisms, but why don't we draw like an actual product and show like a chair or something, and show how the shadow might look underneath it, for instance, with a nice cast shadow. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, now we're going to draw a chair that looks, we're going to draw a shadow for a chair so that it's a little bit more of a real life shadow rather than these prisms. So here we're going to redraw this again, all in pen, and then we're going to add some of the marker to it. Since it's a nice drawing, we can use it as an undersketch. So in this sense, I'm going to draw an overdrawing, tracing of this basically. But you'll notice that I'm not going to be tracing it slowly. I'll be redrawing it in many of its aspects. Maybe I'll make it a little bit wider or something. But here we have some perspective that we were working with, which worked well. So we may as well start with it again. So here we've got the four corners nicely established of this chair. We've got the square that it's sort of comprised of, and the seat. So again, this is something more on the tune of wireframing your sketch so that you have the basics first. Okay. And with that, we can add, first let's draw a little bit more of this chair. So we can add some, you know, these are all going to be sort of like two cylinders with some plastic on it for the seat. So I think that it would be good to have some extra lines here, and they'll round off at the bottom. Okay. Something like that. You don't have to draw through all of it in this sense, but we'll likely have, you know, maybe we can add a bit more of a curvature to this seat up at the top. And maybe if we're crazy, we can add in a handle. And we'll try to map that out nicely on the shadow as well. Okay, so we've got that. And this needs to be a little bit thicker as well. Okay, that's looking good. Good. Okay, so we've got essentially what we need. A nice simple sketch of a chair. Actually, what I'll do now is take a nice photocopy of it. Okay, so we're back here. Now what we need to do is establish where, as again, we're going to start with, I always like starting with that sort of front corner. What we need to do is first we're going to draw the direction of the light. So the light's going to go this way. Light source, okay. And the angle. So again, we're going to do all of them going in the same direction, okay. And that top box, that top corner of the box, we're going to draw down on all four. As long as they're parallel, you're good to go. So, and that they cross those lines. So right now we've got enough information to know the shape of the seat for this chair. Okay, it's that shape projected down. Okay, and that's looking good. To get the so that's looking between these four lines. To get the shape of this guy up at the top, we're only really going to be looking at in between these two. And the same thing applies. We're going to draw those lines straight down to see where they are projecting. Oh, that's interesting. That's the same line. Cool. So these first two lines, this one and this one, are going to have a little arc like that. And then this one and this one is going to have a little arc like that. As you can see, it's quite a distorted shape. You know, this looks nice and flat, very prominent. You can see a lot of the shape of it. But if you were to take this, the same idea applying to where this would need to, you need to find the projection lines here. I'll just estimate it. But it would look something like this. That's essentially the light spot, the hole projecting down on the ground surface. It's very thin, it's very faint because of the orientation and projection of the shadow. So with that in mind, it doesn't really matter, again, for this to be kind of feel a little bit more real, we just need to leave a little bit of white space there, not a lot. But generally speaking, those are the two shapes that we have, and we can make these lines a little bit thicker as they are originating from the legs. You'll notice that we don't have to do anything here for this last one because it's entirely in shadow. Okay, so we've got our shadow projection now. Let's do some markering. Now what I will do here is leave enough room, or leave, oh, I made a little mistake. That shouldn't be there. It should be like this. Oh. This is what happens when you multitask. Okay. So here, I'm just going to make sure that we leave some white space. Okay. So that's just we'll leave that white space there. And the rest we can fill in, with the chisel tip as well as the smaller tip as we see fit. We're gonna need the smaller tip for this stuff here. Alrighty, very good. So that's looking good. A nice dark shadow. This is the only little oopsie. We shouldn't have kind of connected those, but that's okay. How could we make that so that it's not a mistake? What if we did it so that this also had, it like went up a little bit? So that the seat kind of looked a little bit like that. That means we would have to have a little bit of like this. There, this is how I'm fixing it. I'll color all that in. I have a little shadow continuation going back there. So there you go. We've just changed the design, and now it makes sense. There you go. When it comes to some of the, we can add some of the shading. We can add this medium dark to the darker side of things. So we can do it on all four legs and on the sides that we see it. So it'll maybe a little bit on this side as well. But generally, I want to use some of the color. I like this. I just picked up a nice warm brown, and it looks nice. So we can color this guy in as well. And I can be coloring in over the shadow or the warm gray I already used. And here I'm just going to add some sort of vertical or diagonal lines here to show the light kind of being cast on it. So, and it'll help show that kind of transition between this and the small back there. And then we can do it again on the top. Let's say this whole thing surrounds the chair legs. So we're gonna do it. We're gonna outline the whole thing there. And yeah, this one I think we can just do kind of straight, flat, just to keep it simple, since we have some details going on here. Nice. Okay, let's let that refocus. There you go. Okay, so we've got this chair. It's looking nice. And we've got a very complicated but very nice cast shadow happening beneath it, which looks splendid. This autofocus is really not working. Okay, there you go. So apologies for that. Hopefully that didn't happen too often. Now the last thing that we can do is add a little bit of line weight, I think. So on the darker sides, we can bump up some of the line weight there. And on the lighter sides, but mainly the darker sides can use it. Or the undersides of things. Here we've got, it's an exterior line, but also an overlap. So we've got high contrast going on in that front section. Same thing could be said here. Those back sections, you don't have to really do too much. You can if you wanted to. But this is now kind of up to preference. Ugh, this autofocus. Okay, there we go. I'm not going to touch anymore, so you guys can take a look at it. There you go. That's how, we can be applying some more complicated shadow construction principles, methods to, more natural looking real life object. but it all really starts with doing a lot of these examples with different prisms. So I encourage you to be drawing a variety of different prisms and then coming up with a a light source and trying to get more complicated as well. I would say that keep this in mind, that we're not here to draw shadows. We're here to kind of understand. It's good to understand how they need to be cast, but ultimately, finding those shortcuts is the thing that I want you guys to start finding as well, so that you're not here, spending an hour constructing a shadow, but it's much faster, much easier. So anyway, that's the idea. And yeah, looking forward to seeing your work.